Rabbi Wein continues, by any measure it was a large and fearsome Jewish army. As testified in Yigal Yadin's book about Bar Kokhba, he was very charismatic, intelligent person, as well as religiously observant and a pious Jew. He was a natural leader. Now this is an important point because there are elements outside in the world that try to forge history. As we know, 200 years ago in Poland there was a Jew who later became assimilated and a heretical Jew. His name was Tzvi Hirsch Gretz. In Polish, they called him Heinrich Gretz. Heinrich Gretz, when he was younger, he even worked with a famous Orthodox rabbi, a rabbi named Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who was one of the major league players fighting against the Reform movement in Europe. So he was working with him, this Heinrich fellow, Gretz, and he was responsible for Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch's writings and manuscripts. And later on, he went OTD, off the derech, went off the path, the religious path, and he really became messed up, assimilated, and he became an historian. And in one of his books, he speaks about Bar Kokhba as being some kind of assimilated, secular type of Jew. Also the army of Bar Kokhba being secular types of Jew. Of course, in our sources we see that this was definitely a mistake. It was not so at all. It was exactly the opposite. We hear it, first of all, we know it from our sources. And number two, we have here Rabbi Wein, and we have a Yigal Yadin, who's not a religious fellow. He writes this clearly in his book, from his letters, from letters that they were able to find over the years, and many other testimonies. Okay, so he goes on, Rabbi Wein, talking about this time of history. Bar Kokhba came to the realization that the only way the Jews would get anything from the Romans would be to take it by force. He therefore organized a very large army and began the rebellion against the Rome, which lasted approximately 6 years. The rebellion lasted 6 years. So once again, as we quoted in the beginning, it ended in the year 135, so it started up in approximately the year 129 after what we call CE, Common Era. During 4 of those years, there was an independent Jewish state, which would be the last one for 2,000 years. Amazing thing. Bar Kokhba followed the same strategy that the Jews had followed in the first rebellion against Rome. He first reconquered the Galilee to cut the Romans off from the sea area. Now, if you're in Israel and you hear the sea area, you might not get what I'm talking about. We're not talking about sea. You know, in Israel, they have what they call the territories, Judea and Samaria. They have Area A, Area B, Area C. I'm not talking about sea. I'm not talking like sea as in cubs. I'm talking about the sea as in water. S-E-A, okay? So to cut off the Romans from the sea. Then he surrounded Jerusalem and forced the Romans out. He had active support of most of the rabbis, in contradiction to the first revolt for sure, and there's the question mark. The rabbis were more neutral in the second one, where we spoke about Pappus and Lunius. Their revolution in the year 110 was more neutral. And all of a sudden, during these 6 years of revolution, in the time of Bar Kokhba, the rabbis, Rabbi Akiva at the head, they not only supported, but they had crowned him Messiah of the Jewish people. Bar Kokhba's reputation became so great that according to the records of the times, many non-Jews came to fight in his army. They saw it as a real chance to bring down the Roman Empire. Many people were not happy with the Romans and their ways. Amazing. All told, Bar Kokhba eventually mustered an army between 350,000 and 400,000 people. In the ancient world, that was an enormous army, greater in number than the entire Roman army. The Romans were so pressed that Hadrian brought his generals and all of his troops from England, Gaul, Germany, and all of the provinces scattered throughout the Roman world. The reason was simple. Rome felt itself threatened as no other time. It was a total war. At one point, when Bar Kokhba took back Jerusalem, he claimed that he was going to rebuild the temple. Interesting. Okay, now moving on here, we have Rabbi Yitzchak Abarvanel. Rabbi Yitzchak Abarvanel, one of his books is called Yeshuot Mashiach. In this book, Rabbi Abarvanel, he tries to strengthen the belief amongst the Jewish people in the coming of the Messiah. The Abarvanel takes passages from the Talmud and other Jewish sources that discuss in various ways the coming of the Messiah, and he deliberates on them. And he strengthens the Jewish people's hearts to believe that this will come soon. Now, he has 2 or 3 pages where he discusses the revolution of Bar Kokhba. And here's what he says, an amazing statement. This is a personal testimony of the Abarvanel. Let's listen up closely to the information that he was able to attain. He says the following. Before he gets into the information that he saw with his own eyes, he tells us, as we know, those that know, that the information of this time, of this revolution, as far as Jewish Torah sources, there are very, very few. And if you look in whether it's the Talmud, whether it's the Midrashim, and a few other places, you'll see there's very scarce information. So, he says the following, but if you look at the chronicles and the history books of the Romans at the time, I'm with my own eyes, he's writing this is on page 61 in the book Yeshuot Mashiach. Listen to what he says, amazing. I'm translating here. I saw with my own eyes, I read with my own eyes the tremendous amount of wars and strength that Bar Kokhba and his men demonstrated. And they had tremendous, they treated the enemies with tremendous cruelty. Bar Kokhba took his soldiers to Egypt, to Alexandria, and they did tremendous revenge against the Roman population that had taken over that area. And they destroyed all the Roman conquests in Egypt. And there was no force that was able to stand in the way to stop Bar Kokhba and the Jewish army. Wherever he would go, he would destroy and kill the enemies. In fact, their blood was being spilled in tremendous amount of unbelievable amounts the Romans, anywhere that the Jews came across enemies, they would just destroy them, and the Romans' blood was all over. There was no mercy on the Romans. And after, this is the Abarvanel saying this, after I read in Roman history books this period of history to see what an unbelievable force, what a powerhouse Bar Kokhba and the Jewish army was, it's understandable, he writes, that such a figure like Bar Kokhba could be thought and accepted as a Messiah, because he was just going everywhere and destroying the Romans. Okay. We see here that the strength of the Jewish army and the fear that they put into the enemies, this was, as we will see later, the Romans were really on the verge of capitulation, of giving up. And we'll see what went wrong here, unfortunately. But we see very clearly that this is a tremendous force. The Jewish people at this time was a tremendous force. Now, we spoke about the physical side. How about as far as religion is concerned? We spoke about the historian Gretz, Heinrich Gretz. Let's look in our sources as far as the attitude of Bar Kokhba and the soldiers to Judaism, to Torah. And let's look at a few sources. Number one, it says in two places. It says in the Jerusalem Talmud, tractate fasting, Ta'anit, fourth chapter, 5th paragraph, says the following, that the sages came up to Bar Kokhba and said, listen, we hear what you're doing, that in order to be accepted in your army, you have to be brave enough and courageous enough to tear your own pinky off. But, the Jewish people, we're not allowed to perform upon ourselves blemishes. We're not allowed to perform blemishes on ourselves. A Jew has to be whole. And so he said, well, what should I do then? So they gave him the idea that you should, in order to see if these people are suitable for your army, they are soldier types, then they should uproot trees with their own bare hands. What did Bar Kokhba do? He listened to the rabbis. Amazing. He said, okay, from that time on, once the sages came up to him and told him that information, he stopped. And from that time on, 200,000 more enlisted into the Jewish army, and these were tested by their brute strength to uproot trees. So that's an amazing thing. It's if we think about it, it's really amazing, because as we're beginning to understand that these were religious people, these were very pious people. You don't have today, the image of a Jew is the image of a person that's weak. And we know that one of the reasons why Rabbi Kahana had to start the Jewish Defense League, the JDL, was because unfortunately the Jews were scapegoats to the anti-Semite bullies who would prey on the Jews because they knew that the Jews would not respond. So this was terrible. So think about it. 2,000 years have passed. Look at the image. Look at the image of the Jewish people then, to understand about these soldiers, that when the rabbis said something, that was it. They listened, and we're going on further now. So it's an amazing thing how times have changed. Let's go on. The commentator Anaf Yosef on this Talmud, he says the following: that even though that Bar Kokhba was such a warrior, one of these rocky fellows, those are my words, he would surrender himself, he would make himself humble before the sages of Israel, and he would listen to what they told him. Amazing thing. Imagine a guy, he's a warrior, he knows the war, he's one of these strategists in the army, he understands fighting. For a person like that to lower themselves and to listen to the words of the rabbis, this is an amazing trait. It's a really amazing trait. Most people who are, powerful, if you saw, I don't know then if you saw this, but there's an amazing scene that somebody sent me. I think it was maybe in the 7th game, Cleveland and whoever they were playing, maybe Indiana. Anyways, it's the last minute of the game or some last second of the game. So LeBron James, he flies up on this table, maybe it was a press table, and he starts going like this, imagine LeBron James, like the rabbis come up to him, LeBron James, and they say, listen, LeBron, we suggest to you, a few things. Man, he's just like, woo, woo, slap him up. Man, get out of my face. It's an amazing thing. So we have here this warrior, this Rambo type of Bar Kokhba, but he was a person that he would lower himself and listen to the advice of the rabbis. Not only that, it says in the Talmud, in the tractate of Gittin, on the 58th page, an amazing thing. Now, how did the soldiers of Bar Kokhba fight? They fought with tefillin. Now, there's a discrepancy how exactly they fought with tefillin, because if you think about it, there's tefillin that you have on your hand, and there's tefillin that you have on your head. Now, how are you supposed to fight a war if you have tefillin on your hand? So there is an opinion, there are many opinions, that the soldiers, folks, you have to put on a seatbelt. We have no insurance if you fall off your chair. There are many opinions, halachic opinions, that at the time that the soldiers of Bar Kokhba, they all fought with tefillin. What is it called in English? Phalant? That's a really phalant. How do we say it?
Rasteries or something.
Yeah, it's a really difficult word, for us common folk. Anyways, the things you put on your hand and your arm. So why? So there are opinions that say that they put both the tefillin for your hand and the tefillin for your head on their head in order that their arms would be free. Now, how can you do this? Can you imagine, you walk in tomorrow to the synagogue, local synagogue, and there's some dude, man, he's putting on, the tefillin of his hand, he's put on his head, and then he put his head on his head. You got, 2 heads are better than one, maybe, we could say, don't know. But that would be pretty unusual, you would stop! Freak out. So the Talmud tells us that the Talmud says we know that there is room on a person's head for two pairs of tefillin. That's why if you go see the secret type of Jews, the Kabbalistic Jews, they have, many times you won't notice it because they have this gigantic, one of these gallon type of skull caps on, so and their tefillin is below it, so you can't see what's going on underneath that big sucker of a kippah, of a skull cap. But they put on 2 pairs of tefillin in one shot for the entire prayers. We're talking the morning prayers. You'll see, if you ever go up to one of these, Kabbalistic Jews, you'll see that. So in the times of the wars and the revolution of Bar Kokhba's men, every one of the soldiers wore tefillin. And according to many opinions, they would put the tefillin of their hand on their head, so they had two pairs of tefillin, so to speak, on their head. Amazing. So it says in the Talmud, on the page of Gittin 58, an amazing thing, that they found in the city of Beitar an unbelievable amount, like hundreds of thousands of these pairs of tefillin, that when the Jews were murdered, they were murdered with their tefillin on. It's an amazing thing. This is a secular army? No way, Ray. Not only that, they found letters that Bar Kokhba, the leader, would send. Every year he made sure to send all the Jewish soldiers, the four species, around the time of Sukkot, the tabernacle holiday. He would send to the camps, the military camps, he would send to all the soldiers, he would send the four species, the Arbat Aminim. So, amazing thing. And we know, we just said, that his goal was to build the third temple. That's what he was going for. So we're talking about religious fighters here. Okay. We will start, I don't know how long we're going to go here, but we will start with a tremendous contradiction in the Rambam. Tremendous contradiction in the Rambam. In one place, we have, listen closely, in one place in the laws of, and this is Maimonides, we're in the laws of wars and kings, the 11th chapter, the 3rd law. Translating, it says the following: do not think that the Messiah has to perform any miracles, any, hocus pocus kind of stuff. Don't think that the Messiah has to resurrect the dead. Anyone that says this is a idiot. That's the words of the Rambam, a tipesh. This is not so. The Messiah does not have to perform miracles, hocus pocus, does not have to resurrect the dead. None of this miraculous stuff. Why? What's our proof? Rabbi Akiva is our proof. Why? Because Rabbi Akiva was the greatest of all the rabbis in the time of the Mishnah, in the time of the Talmud. And he was the supporter. He was the supporter of Bar Kokhba and the Jewish revolt against the Romans. And he even said about Bar Kokhba that he is the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah. Amazing. And no, Rabbi Akiva did not ask for Bar Kokhba. He did not ask for any signs. During the time, the sages did not ask for any signs, any miracles, any wonders, any resurrections of the dead. They didn't ask for any of that stuff. So, in the next law, 4, the Rambam writes that if we have somebody from the King David dynasty, a person that learns Torah and does and observes the commandments, like King David, in both the written and oral laws, and he tries to bring the Jewish people closer to Judaism, and he fights He ingathers the exiles. This is for sure a Messiah. So we have two stages. We have a possibility of a Messiah. That's what we said at the beginning. A person like Shimon Bar Kochva, that is he has the ability to be the Messiah. And on the other hand, in a different place in the Rambam, listen to this. We have in the Laws of Repentance, the 9th chapter, Law 2, says the following. The Jewish people and the prophets and the sages have always yearned for the times of the Messiah. Why is that? Because at the times of the Messiah, there will be tremendous amount of knowledge, spiritual knowledge in the world. And why? Who's going to teach us the spiritual knowledge? This is going to be the King Messiah. He will come from the King David dynasty. He will be a person of tremendous wisdom, like more so than King Solomon, and he will be a prophet close to Moses. And therefore he'll teach the entire people tremendous Torah. So this is very interesting, because Bar Kochva was a religious person, of course, as we see. He was a person that listened to the rabbis, to the scholars. However, he was not on the level of spiritual knowledge that King Solomon was on. He was not on a prophetical level that Moses was on. More than Solomon and the same level as Moses, that's the Messiah. So what's going on over here? What's going on over here? Seems to be a in-your-face kind of contradiction of two sources. So on one hand, we see in the first source that Maimonides is telling us that we don't need any miraculous, we don't need any miracles, we don't need any resurrections, any wonders. And he gives an example as Rabbi Akiva believing and the Jewish people believing that Bar Kochva was the Messiah of the Jewish people. So here we have an example of a person that had the ability to be a Jewish Messiah. He does not fit what the Maimonides himself says in the laws of repentance, that he has to be on just a tremendous spiritual level. It wasn't him. He was religious. He was pious. He was very modest. True. So how exactly do we rectify the situation? Another contradiction, and we'll hold it right over here for next week, God willing, is the following. This Maimonides that I quoted from the Laws of Wars and Kings, chapter 11, Law 3, when the Rambam says, when Maimonides said that we do not need any miracles, or we do not need any signs, we do not have to give any tests to the Messiah to see if he's real, right, the Ravid says on this Rambam, what's going on over here? Did Maimonides forget what it says in the Talmud? If we look up the Talmud on the Laws of the Courts, Sanhedrin, Tractate Sanhedrin, on page 93, side B. There's a verse that's taken from Isaiah 11 that talks about the anointed one, the Messiah, the Savior of the Jewish people. He has to be a person that the Spirit of God is on them, that he's a person of wisdom, he's a person of tremendous strength. And then there's a dispute between Rava and Rabbi Alexandri. What does this verse actually mean? Why? It says that he has to, the Messiah, the anointed one, has to be a person that you could smell by him fear of God. Now, what does that expression mean? You could smell the fear of God in such a person. So there's a dispute between the two. Rabbi Alexandri says, what does it mean? What does it mean that the word lahariach, to smell, it says, it doesn't mean to smell. It means that spiritually speaking, the Messiah is a person that is suffering tremendously in this world. Physically, materialistically, he's a person that's suffering tremendously, and he has tremendous amounts of good deeds and commandments that he does. So according to Rav Alexandri, that's what it means. The Messiah, we have to check for two things. Is he a person that's suffering in this world? Is he a person that's laden with tremendous amounts of good deeds and commandments that he does? On the other hand, Rava disagrees. And he says what? That if you want to be the Messiah, the test for the Messiah is that he has to be able to decide law, decide cases of judgment in courts by smell. By smell. Now we're not going to get in why dafka smell, but it has something to do with Adam and Eve. Something to do with Adam and Eve. This was one sense that was not contaminated during the sin of the tree of knowledge. Eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge was the sense of smell. That's why if you ever notice, the first thing we do, the first commandment that we do during the new week on Saturday night is we smell the scents, the various spices that smell good, or plants that smell good, using our nose. But that's a whole different subject. So according to Rava, the Messiah is a person that he comes into the court, like here comes the judge, and he, without even listening to the sides, he doesn't hear the arguments, he just comes in there. It's kind of like, remember, who was it? Samantha. Remember that series about Samantha? When she wanted to do something magic, she would do something, move her nose, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember if it was... What?
Twitch your nose.
Yeah, she would twitch her nose. Yeah. You got to be a certain age to know these things. So, something like this is an amazing thing. An amazing, supernatural. He comes into the court, the judge, the Messiah, and he says, okay, here's my verdict. Verdict. Today you go to court, they schlep you out for 2-3 years till they finally decide, sometimes even more than that. This Messiah, he's the kind of guy, he just walks into the court, he does 100 cases in an hour, no, you go to this, 5 years, 4 years, woo, yeah, he's really rolling over there. So what's going on? According to Rabbi Alexander, the Messiah is a regular guy. He's not doing any magic. He's not doing any miracles, any wonders. He's a person that's suffering in this world. It's not easy for him in this world. He's a person that's a tremendous righteous person. He has a tremendous amount of good deeds, commandments that he does. It's just simple. According to Rava, it has to be like some kind of magician, some kind of wonder of wonders. So what's going on? Therefore, the Ravid says, what in the world is Maimonides talking about? How could he say that we don't need to, there's no requirement for the Messiah to be tested, or to prove himself, or to do some kind of wonder, like in a courtroom, you decide who's guilty and who's innocent. You don't need any of that. Why? We have proof. Rabbi Akiva. No one ever asked for signs. Now this is difficult. Why? Because the Talmud goes on. It says the following. That Bar Kochva, he was the king over Israel for 2.5 years. The rabbis, the sages, came up to him and said, he came up to the sages and said, I am the Messiah. Bar Kochva says, I am the Messiah. He comes up to the sages. And they said, you know what? And then no problem, we'll believe you. But we're going to give you a test. And they brought some kind of case in front of Bar Kochva, and they say, we want to hear what's your decision on this case, without hearing the sides, arguments. You just decide. When they saw that he was not able to do that, it said that he was killed, or he died, or they killed him. We'll get into that later on. But very unusual. What happened to Maimonides? Maimonides, don't you remember what this Talmud mentioned in Sanhedrin, 93rd page, side B? What happened to that? They asked him to perform a miraculous act. When he was unable to come through, either they blew him away, or maybe the Gentiles blew him away, but that was it. So what in the world is the Rambam bringing down in his book of laws? This is not ideas, it's laws. What in the world is going on? Rabbi Akiva. We have to understand what we started the class with. In the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, in the name of his rabbi was Rabbi Akiva. He mentions that this star that the book of Numbers talked about, that there will come a tremendous star, a light upon the Jewish people, who will destroy Moab, who will destroy the children of Seth, who will destroy Edom. Even after the fact where it was seen that, that Bar Kochva wasn't exactly the Messiah, Rabbi Akiva did not change his opinion. Till all the way through, he continued believing that Bar Kochva was the Messiah. Amazing. Even after all of this stuff that was going on, he still believed all was proved, quote unquote. So what's going on here? How did Rabbi Akiva keep on believing? It seems like we proved that he was a fake. It seems like Rabbi Akiva made a mistake. So what in the world is Rabbi Akiva continuing picking up and saying this is our Messiah? And why is the Maimonides, why is he telling us the law that this is an example of who the Messiah is? So we have all these contradictions here. We have a contradiction within Maimonides. What kind of personality is the Messiah? Is he some spiritual great, some guy like Moses, like King Solomon, or is he a simple person like Bar Kochva? And we have within the various sources, we have the discrepancy. Was he killed? Was he given this test, or was he not given this test? Stay tuned next week, God willing.
There's obviously a lot of reasons to these discrepancies. I don't know how to turn this off.
Where's the boss?
Yeah. Right there.